Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Gringotts Hub. In today's episode, we explore, what if Goblin blood test revealed Harry was heir to 14 ancient houses and Voldemort had to bow before him? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Weight of Blood. The morning Harry Potter first stepped into Gringotts, he was wearing a shirt 3 sizes too large and trainers with a hole near the left toe. He hadn't slept well. Dudley had kicked his cupboard door twice in the night for no reason other than boredom, and his stomach was still growling from a breakfast that had consisted of 2 pieces of toast and whatever scraps Aunt Petunia decided weren't worth saving. None of that mattered the moment he walked through the doors. The bank hit him like a physical thing, the cold, the smell of stone and metal and something older than either, the torchlight catching the edges of gold and glass in ways that made the air itself seem to shimmer. Harry stopped walking without meaning to, just for a second, and Hagrid nearly knocked him flat. "Keep movin', Harry, you're blockin' the doorway," Hagrid said cheerfully, steering him forward with one enormous hand. "People got business ter conduct." Harry moved. He kept his eyes wide open, though, because he'd lived 11 years in a house where wonder was something you were supposed to apologize for, and he had absolutely no intention of doing that here. The goblins behind their counters didn't look up. They scratched in ledgers, counted coins, weighed things on scales that looked older than any building Harry had ever been inside. One of them was having a detailed, rapid conversation in a language Harry didn't know with a witch in green robes who looked like she might cry. The goblin looked unbothered. "Yeah, get used to them," Hagrid said quietly, which Harry thought was a funny thing to say about creatures who seemed to be doing precisely what they wanted and didn't care whether anyone got used to them or not. They joined the nearest queue. Harry watched a family ahead of them, mother, father, a boy about his age with polished shoes and brand new robes, hand over a key and some paperwork. The goblin behind the counter examined the paperwork with the kind of expression that suggested he'd seen 10,000 pieces of paper exactly like it and found all of them equally uninteresting. Then they reached the front. Hagrid pulled out a letter, which he presented with the air of someone who'd handled this particular errand before. "We're here for 2 things today," he said. "First, Harry Potter's vault, key provided by Dumbledore himself." He produced a small gold key and set it on the counter. "Second, well." He reached back into his coat, a coat that seemed to have more pockets than should have been physically possible, and produced a sealed envelope. Dumbledore's instructions said Harry ought to have a heritage test done. Said it were standard practice for a young wizard being introduced to his inheritance. Harry looked up. "A heritage test? Goblin thing," Hagrid said. "Blood and magic. They can tell ya what family vaults ya have access to, whether there's any old accounts in your name, that sort of stuff. Totally normal." He nodded at the goblin, apparently finished with his explanation. The goblin hadn't moved. He was looking at the sealed envelope. His long fingers had gone very still against the countertop. "This is signed by Albus Dumbledore," the goblin said. His voice was precise and flat, the way a knife is flat before you turn it. "That's right," Hagrid agreed. "And the subject of the heritage test is Harry James Potter." "Also right, yeah." The goblin's dark eyes moved to Harry. They were not warm eyes, but they were extremely attentive, in the way that a very well-made instrument is attentive, built to measure things exactly, not approximately. Harry met his gaze without quite meaning to. The goblin was quiet for just a moment longer than made sense, and then he stood up. He was only a head taller than the counter, but something about the motion made it feel significant. "One moment," he said, and walked away before Hagrid could respond. Harry watched him go. He disappeared through a small door at the far end of the counter row, one Harry hadn't even noticed until it opened. "Is that normal?" Harry asked. "Dunno," Hagrid admitted. "Never had one done myself." They waited. The queue behind them shuffled with mild impatience. Harry looked at a painting on the far wall, dragons, depicted in careful gold and black, their wings spread over a mountain range Harry didn't recognize, and thought about the word heritage, and tried to figure out what he expected it to mean. His heritage, as far as he'd ever been told, was a dead mum and a dead dad and a cupboard under the stairs. The small door opened again. The goblin who came through it was not the same one who had left. This goblin was older. Considerably older. His skin had the quality of very old leather left in the sun, and he walked with a staff that was as tall as he was, made of something dark that wasn't quite wood. His robes were deep green with gold edging. The younger goblin followed at his shoulder, looking, if Harry had to put a word to it, nervous. Every goblin in the hall looked up when the old one entered. Just briefly. Just enough to register, and then look away again. Harry noticed, because Harry had spent his whole life noticing when the energy in a room changed. The old goblin stopped in front of Harry. He examined him with the unhurried focus of someone who had all the time they needed and intended to use it. "Harry Potter," he said. His voice was deeper than his size suggested. It rumbled a little, like something at the bottom of a very old well. "I am Iron Maw, Senior Elder of Gringotts, London, and Keeper of the Ancient Registers." He paused. "Do you know what a blood heritage test is, boy?" Hagrid said it shows what family vaults I might have access to. Iron Maw's expression shifted just slightly. Not quite amusement. Something more like assessment. "It does that," he said. "Among other things. Will you consent to the full test? Not the abbreviated form, the full inheritance reading. It takes longer. It is more thorough." "Why does it need to be thorough?" Harry asked. "Because," Iron Maw said, and his dark eyes held Harry's with an intensity that felt oddly respectful rather than intimidating, "your name appears in our ancient registers, Mr. Potter. More than once." Harry looked at Hagrid. Hagrid was frowning, clearly out of his depth. Harry looked back at Iron Maw. "Sure," Harry said. "Let's do the full one." They were taken to a room Harry was fairly certain wasn't on any public-facing floor plan Gringotts had ever published. It was below the main hall. They took an elevator that didn't go sideways or up but simply down, in a way that felt more like falling than descending. Hagrid spent the ride with his eyes shut and his enormous hands gripping the gate. Harry spent it watching the walls of carved stone slide past and thinking about the fact that he'd been told, his entire life, that his parents were unremarkable people who died in a car crash. A car crash. He was starting to think that was probably not true. The room they arrived in was circular, lit by a ring of blue-white flames that sat in iron brackets without anything fueling them. The floor was stone, dark, polished, carved with symbols Harry couldn't read. In the center was a wide, shallow basin, also stone, filled with still water that caught the light and held it. There were 4 other goblins already present when they entered. They stood at the 4 points of the compass, robed in the same deep green as Iron Maw, and none of them spoke or moved as Harry was led to the center. "You'll need to bleed," Iron Maw said, without particular ceremony. He produced a small silver instrument from his robe, something between a needle and a blade, no longer than Harry's finger. 3 drops into the basin. No more, no less. Harry took it. He pressed the tip to his thumb, which stung more than he expected, sharply, cleanly, and held his hand over the basin. 3 drops fell and hit the still water. They didn't spread the way blood should. They sank straight down, like stones. Iron Maw took the instrument back. He produced a second one and pricked his own finger with an efficiency that suggested he'd done it 10,000 times, and added his own blood to the basin without commentary. "This is Goblin authentication," he said, looking at Harry. "It confirms the test is witnessed and binding under Gringotts' charter. What the basin reveals is absolute and cannot be challenged by the Ministry of Magic, the Wizengamot, or any governing body. Do you understand?" "I understand," Harry said. The water in the basin moved. It didn't ripple, it moved, all at once, the entire surface shifting from horizontal to something more complex, like a tide responding to multiple moons. The blue-white flames in the brackets flared. The four goblin witnesses straightened, and even Iron Maw, who had the posture of someone accustomed to surprises, went very still. Text began to rise from the water. Not floating on it, rising out of it, letter by letter, carved in light. Harry leaned forward because he couldn't help himself. Harrison James Potter, blood of James Charles Potter, son of Fremont Henry Potter, son of Henry Ignotus Potter, blood of Lily Josephine Potter née Evans. That much was expected. Harry's parents. Their names in light, which hit him somewhere below the ribs in a way he filed away to deal with later. Then the water kept moving. House Potter, ancient and noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter. Status, soul. House Peverell, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter. Status, soul. Harry heard Hagrid make a sound somewhere behind him. He didn't turn around. House Gryffindor, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter. Status, soul. The flames flickered. One of the goblin witnesses made a short, sharp sound in their own language. Iron Maw raised one hand and they fell silent. House Slytherin, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter. Status, contested. Contested, Harry said. Another claimant exists, Iron Maw said quietly. The contest is a matter of record. Continue reading. House Ravenclaw, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through maternal line Evans Blackwood. Status, dormant, awakened. House Hufflepuff, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through maternal line Evans Blackwood. Status, dormant, awakened. The water churned faster. The light was brighter now, almost uncomfortable. Harry squinted and kept reading. House Blackwood, ancient and noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through maternal line. Status, soul. House Peverell Gaunt, ancient and noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter by right of conquest and blood. Status, contested. House Emois, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through convergent lineage. Status, dormant. Note, not awakened in 6 centuries. The room had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of a meeting. The absolute silence of people who have stopped breathing. House Pendragon, ancient and most noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through convergent lineage. Status, dormant. Note, not awakened in 9 centuries. House Flammel, ancient and noble, continental. Heir, Harrison James Potter through maternal bloodline, distant. Status, dormant. House Leo Degrants, ancient and noble, preministry. Heir, Harrison James Potter. Status, soul. House Ollivander Branch, ancient and noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through paternal lineage. Status, dormant. House Dumbledore, ancient and noble. Heir, Harrison James Potter through, the water stopped. Everyone in the room was staring at the basin. The light slowly faded from the letters. The water went still again. Iron Maw turned to look at Harry. His expression was, for the first time, something Harry could actually read. It was the expression of a very experienced man who has just seen something he didn't expect to see and is carefully calculating what it means. How many is that? Harry asked. 14, Iron Maw said. And how many is normal? For a young wizard of notable family? Iron Maw paused. 2. Perhaps 3. I have personally witnessed the registration of 5, once, in my career. Another pause. I am 943 years old. Hagrid made the sound again, louder. Harry looked back at him for the first time since the test began, and the sight of Hagrid, enormous, familiar, clearly shaken, was oddly grounding. Are ya all right, Harry? Hagrid asked. Harry thought about it genuinely. He did a sort of internal inventory. His thumb still stung faintly where the needle had gone in. His stomach was still growling. He was standing in an underground chamber in a magical bank, having just been informed that he was the heir to 14 houses including what appeared to be the founder families of every Hogwarts house, the Peverells who invented the Deathly Hallows, and a family named Pendragon that hadn't had a living heir in 9 centuries. "I think so," he said. "What does this actually mean?" "Practically." Ironmore regarded him for a moment, and something in that regard shifted from assessment to something closer to respect. Most 11-year-olds, Harry would later understand, would have either burst into tears or started demanding things. Harry had asked the practical question. "Sit down," Ironmaw said. "This will take some time." They brought chairs. They brought tea, which arrived without anyone going to get it. It simply appeared on a low table, Goblin made, very hot, with what turned out to be shortbread biscuits on the side. Hagrid took 4 and ate them in the time it took Ironmaw to settle himself. "In the wizarding world as currently constituted," Ironmaw began, "the ancient houses are a legal framework. They have seats on the Wizengamot, the governing body, which can be claimed by a recognized heir. They have family vaults, magical properties, legal precedences, and in some cases, binding agreements with other parties that transfer to the heir upon recognition. If you formally claim your seats, all of them, you will hold more votes on the Wizengamot than any individual in the history of the institution. The Ministry of Magic will not like this." "Why not?" "Because the Ministry of Magic," Ironmaw said, with the comfortable contempt of someone who had watched institutions come and go for 9 centuries, prefers its power to remain where it currently sits. 14 house seats would give you the ability to overturn their preferred legislation, dismiss their appointed officials, and in several cases invoke ancient precedences they have spent decades quietly hoping everyone would forget existed." "What about the contested ones? Slytherin and Peverells?" Ironmaw's expression shifted. "The claimant to House Slytherin is the wizard known as Voldemort." Even down here, even in this room, the name made Hagrid flinch. Harry noticed. He filed it away. "And Peverells?" "The same individual. He is descended from Cadmus Peverell through the Gaunt family line. However." Ironmaw folded his hands on the table with the careful deliberateness of someone placing a final piece in an argument. "His claim to House Peverell is through theft and distortion of lineage. Your claim is direct. Goblin law is unambiguous on this point. Blood does not lie, and blood that has been contaminated, as the Gaunt line was, through generations of inbreeding and blood betrayal, yields inferior claim. The Peverell seat is yours by right." "He won't agree with that." "No," Ironmaw said. "He will not." "A beat. There is one other matter." He reached into his robe, the deep green robe with the gold edging, and produced a small scroll. Ancient, Harry could tell that at a glance. The parchment had gone the color of old cream and the edges had crumbled slightly, but whatever was written on it was still legible, and the seal at the bottom was intact. "This document," Ironmaw said, "is a copy of the Peverell fealty accord. It was written by the 3 Peverell brothers, Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus, and bound into the magical architecture of Britain itself at the time of their death. It states, in summary, that any individual who sheds the blood of a Peverell heir with intent to cause death, and survives, binds themselves to acknowledge the dominion of that heir, should the heir survive and claim their inheritance." He looked at Harry steadily. "The ritual your enemy used to restore himself to physical form incorporated your blood." Harry was quiet for a moment. "He used my blood," Harry said. "Yes. And now there's a magical oath that says he has to bow to me." "In simplified terms?" "Yes." Harry thought about this. He thought about the graveyard he hadn't been to yet, because this was before 4th year, before Cedric and the cup and the terrible cold of that place, except that wasn't right, the timeline wasn't right, they were at the beginning, he was 11 and this was his first time in Gringotts, no. The test had been triggered earlier than it should have been. The blood sacrifice had already happened, Ironmaw had said survived, and Harry had a scar on his forehead from an attempt made when he was 1 year old, and the attempt had failed, and the attacker had fled or dissolved, something, and he'd carried a piece of that magic in his scar ever since. When he tried to kill me as a baby, Harry said slowly. He used the killing curse. My mother died, her blood was on the ground. My blood was, he stopped. Is that enough? Shed with intent? Iron Maw was watching him very carefully. You are considerably more perceptive than most people expect you to be, he observed. My relatives expected me to be stupid, Harry said, without heat. I found it was easier to manage when they were wrong. Something that might have been a smile moved across Iron Maw's face, briefly. The answer to your question is, the Accord uses the phrase sheds the blood of. He killed your mother, who was, we now know, through today's test, a descendant of the Peverell line through the Evans-Blackwood connection. He attempted to shed your blood and was repelled by the resulting protection. Whether that constitutes the full activation of the Accord is a matter of ancient magical law that I intend to research thoroughly before committing to an answer. He paused. But I do not think the answer will be favorable to him. The room was quiet. The blue flames had settled back to their steady burn. There's one more thing you said, Harry said. House Dumbledore. Yes. The water stopped before it finished. Iron Maw held his gaze. The basin identified a connection through convergent lineage between your maternal line and the Dumbledore family. It is distant, and it is complicated by the fact that the current lord of that line, the individual you know as Albus Dumbledore, is still living. The claim is therefore neither active nor dormant. It is, pending. Pending what? Pending his death. Or his abdication. A pause. Or his disclosure of the connection, which would trigger a formal recognition. Harry sat back in his chair. He drank some of his tea, which had gone from very hot to exactly right. Outside this room, somewhere above them, the normal world was continuing, Diagon Alley, and witches and wizards buying school supplies, and the September sun on unfamiliar streets, and a boy who was supposed to just be picking up his vault key before getting fitted for robes. He knew, Harry said. It wasn't quite a question. Albus Dumbledore, Iron Maw said carefully, is a very intelligent man who has known about the ancient registers for at least 60 years. Whether he knew the specific contents of your reading today, I cannot say. I can say that the abbreviated test he requested, the one outlined in the letter he gave Hagrid, would not have revealed most of this. It would have shown the Potter vault and nothing further. Hagrid had gone very red. He told me it were standard, he said. He said, he believed, Iron Maw said, with patient precision, that it was sufficient. Whether that belief was genuine or strategic, I am not positioned to say. He looked at Harry. I requested the full test because your name appears in our ancient registers and the registers do not contain errors. We have been waiting for a Potter heir to enter this bank for 31 years. Since your grandfather Fleamont died without formally claiming the secondary lines. He didn't know either. He knew about Potter and Peverell. The rest, Iron Maw gestured toward the basin. The Evans-Blackwood connection was not discovered until our archivists began cross-referencing continental records 6 years ago. Your mother's family was Muggle-born, officially. In practice, she was a squib-descended witch whose magical lineage had simply gone dormant and re-emerged. It happens. The magical world is not as pure as it likes to believe. Harry thought, briefly and with something sharp, about what certain people at Hogwarts were going to say about that. Then he thought about having 14 house seats on the Wizengamot, and realized it probably didn't matter what they said. Iron Maw produced a leather case, dark green, with a Gringotts seal in gold, and slid it across the table. Inside this case are certified copies of today's reading, authentication documents in Goblin and English, a summary of your currently active family vaults and their balances, and preliminary paperwork for the formal claiming of your houses. He paused. You will need a magical solicitor. I can recommend several who are bound by Gringotts' charter and therefore immune to ministry pressure. Harry took the case. It was heavier than it looked. What do I owe you? He asked. Ironmaw looked at him for a long moment. Gringotts provides heritage tests at no charge to registered account holders, he said. The fee is the truth of what we discover. Something in his expression suggested that this was a phrase with more weight behind it than its surface meaning. We are not servants, Mr. Potter. We are bankers. We deal in truth because truth, ultimately, is the only currency that holds its value. Then we have the same priorities, Harry said. He stood up. He picked up the leather case. He looked at Hagrid, who was staring at him the way people stare at things they thought they understood and have just realized they didn't. Sorry about all this, Hagrid, Harry said. I know we were just supposed to pick up some gold. Hagrid let out a breath that was half laugh, half bewilderment. Bit more than that, seems, he said. A bit more than that, Harry agreed, and followed Ironmaw toward the elevator. They went back up, through the stone and the dark, the cable cart rattling and Hagrid turning faintly green but holding it together, and when they came back out into the main hall, it was different. Not the hall itself, that was exactly as it had been, goblins at their counters, torches burning, the whole old magnificent machinery of the bank moving without pause. What was different was the way the goblins looked at Harry as he passed. It was brief. It was slight. But he caught it on 2 faces, 3, 4, not quite deference, not quite curiosity. Something between the two. The look of people who know something significant has just happened and are watching to see what happens next. Harry kept his chin up and walked through them and out into the London sunlight. Diagon Alley bloomed around him, color and noise and the smell of something sweet from the ice cream cart near the entrance, and for a moment Harry just stood still and let it wash over him. 11 years old, with a hole in his shoe and a 3 sizes too large shirt and a leather case full of paperwork that apparently meant he was the most significant political figure in Wizarding Britain, provided he chose to be. Hagrid came out behind him, blinking in the light, and put one enormous hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. How ya feelin'? He asked, again. Hungry, Harry said honestly. That shortbread was good but it wasn't very much. Hagrid laughed at that, a big, surprised, relieved laugh, and steered him toward Madame Malkin's, which was the first stop on the list. We'll get ya a proper meal after robes, he said. Leaky Cauldron does a good shepherd's pie. Hagrid, Harry said, as they walked. Yeah. You didn't know about any of that, did you? What Ironmaw said. About Dumbledore knowing. Hagrid was quiet for a beat too long. Dumbledore's got his reasons for things, he said, finally. That's not a no. Another beat. No, Hagrid said, and he sounded older when he said it. It's not. Harry nodded and kept walking. He filed that away, too, in the place where he kept things he wasn't ready to be angry about yet. He'd learned, living in a house where feelings were liabilities, to give himself permission to deal with things when he was equipped to deal with them rather than when they happened. It wasn't suppression. It was logistics. Right now, the logistical priority was robes. At Madame Malkin's, he got measured while a pale, pointed-faced boy stood on the next podium and talked extensively about himself. Harry listened with one ear and thought about the names on the water. Peverell. Gryffindor. Emrys. Pendragon. The boy was saying something about Hogwarts and Quidditch and his father, and Harry realized, distantly, that this was the kind of conversation he was going to need to navigate for the next 7 years. Do you play? The boy asked. Don't know yet, Harry said. Haven't tried. The boy seemed to find this puzzling. Harry found that interesting, the idea that someone's identity could be so thoroughly organized around activities they'd never tried, but he didn't say so. He watched Madame Malkin pin his hem and thought about how you got a magical solicitor, and whether Ironmaw's recommendations would arrive by owl or some other method, and what exactly the Peverell Fealty Accord said in full, and whether the Emrys name meant what the name Emrys always meant when you read it in any book ever written. Not awakened in 6 centuries. He was still thinking about that when they left. The shepherd's pie at the leaky cauldron was excellent. Hagrid had 3, and Harry had 1.5, and they didn't talk about the bank again because Harry could feel Hagrid needed not to think about it for a while, and he was willing to give him that. He asked about Hogwarts instead, about the castle, the grounds, the ghosts, and Hagrid lit up like a lantern describing it, his enormous hands drawing shapes in the air as he talked about the Quidditch pitch and the lake and the Ollery, and Harry sat across from him and ate shepherd's pie and let himself feel, for just a few minutes, like a normal 11-year-old going to a school he was going to love. The leather case sat on the bench beside him, silent and heavy, and he kept one hand on it without meaning to. On the walk back to the leaky cauldron to arrange the Muggle side of the journey home, they passed through the alley a second time, and Harry noticed something he hadn't on the way in. There was a bookshop, Flourish and Blots, he'd clocked it on the way through, and through its front window, spine out on a shelf, was a book with gold lettering on the spine. A History of the Ancient Houses of Britain, it read. 3rd edition, revised. Harry stopped. Just a tick, he told Hagrid, and ducked inside. He found the book. He turned it over. The back described it as the most comprehensive genealogical record available to the public, approved by the Wizengamot Office of Historical Records. He bought it. He also bought, on impulse, from the shelf directly below, Practical Goblin Law for the Practicing Wizard, and the Peverell Legacy, Truth and Myth. The shop assistant wrapped them without comment. Harry put them in his bag, which was already full of schoolbooks. The weight was considerable. He didn't mind. On the Muggle side of the wall, in the bright ordinary Saturday of a London summer, he walked beside Hagrid through streets full of people who had no idea that the boy in the too large shirt had just, quietly, and without ceremony, become one of the most powerful people in their world. Hagrid hailed a taxi. It took 3 tries, because the sight of him made most drivers keep going, and in the back seat of the cab, Harry opened the leather case and looked at the certified copy of his heritage reading again. 14 names, printed in Gringotts' precise script. He looked at each one. He thought about what each one might mean. He thought about Heir saying we have been waiting for a Potter heir and what it meant that the goblins, who answered to no one, who had fought multiple wars with the wizarding world and had their own opinions about most things, had a category for waiting. He thought about Dumbledore. He thought about the abbreviated test that would have shown him nothing. He thought, I'm going to need to know everything. Not out of anger. Not yet. Just the clean, practical understanding of someone who has spent 11 years getting by on information other people would have given him if they'd bothered, and who has learned that the gap between what you're told and what's true is almost always where the important things live. The taxi moved through London. The sun moved across the sky. Harry Potter pressed his hand flat against the leather case and thought, let's see what you all do next. Chapter 3, The Oath Written in Stars. Dumbledore's reply came on a Tuesday. Harry was eating toast at breakfast when the owl landed, not a school owl, not Hedwig, but a large tawny bird with a knowing look about it that Harry associated, he was realizing, with people who had spent a long time in proximity to Dumbledore. The bird deposited a letter, accepted a piece of bacon, and left with the unhurried confidence of an animal that had never once been late. The letter was brief. Harry, Thursday evening, 7 o'clock, my office. The password is lemon drop. I am, I confess, more pleased than surprised by your letter. Come with your questions. I will endeavor to come with my answers. A.D. Harry passed it to Hermione, who read it and passed it to Ron, who read it and said, he said he's pleased but not surprised. What does that mean? It means he expected this eventually, Hermione said. He just didn't expect it at 11. He expected it when I was older, Harry said. When he'd had more time to manage it. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. The question is whether he's given the same thought to what he's going to tell me as I've given to what I'm going to ask him. And has he? Ron asked. Probably more, Harry said honestly. He's had 60 years longer to think about most things than I have. But I'm not going in blind, which is probably not what he expected. He ate the rest of his toast and thought about what he actually wanted from the meeting. Not confrontation. Confrontation was satisfying and usually useless. What he wanted was information, specifically the information Dumbledore held that wasn't in any book and wasn't in the Gringotts documents. Dumbledore had known Harry's parents. He had known about the blood connection, at some level, for years. He had made choices, multiple deliberate choices, about what to tell Harry and when. Harry wanted to understand the logic. Not because he was inclined to forgive it, but because understanding it would tell him a great deal about what Dumbledore was likely to do next. In the meantime, there was potions. Snape was a problem Harry had been navigating carefully since the first class, when the professor had stood over him with a list of questions clearly designed to demonstrate his ignorance, and Harry had answered 3 of them correctly, not because he'd known the answers, but because he'd read the chapter the night before simply out of the habit of reading everything he could get his hands on. Snape had not been pleased. He'd awarded the points because he had no mechanical reason not to, but his expression had done something complicated and his questions had sharpened for the rest of the lesson in a way that felt less like cruelty and more like genuine curiosity wearing cruelty's mask. Harry had found it interesting. Snape's pedagogy, Harry had observed over the first weeks, was built on a very specific dynamic. He expected students to be ignorant, he expected Gryffindors specifically to be arrogant about their ignorance, and he used both expectations as instruments. When students fit the mold, he was satisfied. When they didn't, something shifted in him, not warmth, nothing like warmth, but an attention that was almost involuntary, like a person whose job involves looking for things suddenly seeing one. Harry didn't volunteer answers in Snape's class. He didn't raise his hand. He did the work precisely and completely and didn't look for credit. This, he had noticed, was driving Snape quietly insane, because there was nothing to punish and nothing to reward and nothing to fit into the framework he'd constructed. Harry was happy to be a framework problem for Snape. It kept the attention mutual rather than one-directional. "He's going to find out about the blood test eventually," Hermione said, walking beside Harry down to the dungeons. "He's a Death Eater, former, supposedly, and that document went to the Ministry. Someone will tell him." "Someone probably already has," Harry said. "Snape and Dumbledore talk. And Dumbledore wrote back within 2 days. So he knows. Probably. Which means every time he looks at me in potions and decides what to do about it, he's already made a choice." Harry paused. "He hasn't changed how he treats me. He's still trying to embarrass me in class. That tells me something." "What?" "That he's decided, at least for now, that pretending he doesn't know is simpler than doing anything about it." Harry pushed open the dungeon door. "Which is fine. I'd rather have people pretend they don't know than people who know and start treating me differently." Hermione looked at him. "Most people would want to be treated differently." "Most people haven't spent 11 years being treated like nothing," Harry said, without particular emotion. "It stops being the goal." The potions lesson was, as usual, technically demanding and interpersonally interesting. Neville was Harry's bench partner, which Harry had arranged deliberately in the first week. Neville's hands were steadier when he wasn't nervous, and he was less nervous when he wasn't working alone. Harry had noticed this in the way you notice things about people when you pay attention without making it obvious you're paying attention. Today's potion was a forgetfulness draft. Neville was dicing flitterby moth wings with the careful concentration of someone defusing something. Harry was monitoring the heat under the cauldron and thinking about the Peverell Accord. Ironmaw's response to his letter had arrived 4 days ago. It was longer than Harry had expected and denser than almost anything he'd read, and he'd been working through it incrementally, the way you ate a meal when you weren't sure of the portions. The key point was this: Ironmaw had found it. Not just confirmation of the Accord's existence, Harry already had that. But the full text, pulled from the Gringotts archive of pre-ministry magical instruments, cross-referenced against 3 other ancient documents, and translated from a form of Old English so archaic that Ironmaw had apparently needed to call in a specialist. The full text was 4 pages of dense, precise, old magical language, and buried in the third page was a clause that Hermione had read 3 times and then sat very quietly with for about 10 minutes before saying anything. And whosoever doth shed the blood of the Peverell line, with malice aforethought and intent to extinguish the heir thereof, whether by direct action or by proxy of dark instrument, and doth subsequently consume or incorporate that blood into their own body or magical working, shall by the ancient accord of the 3 brothers be bound in fealty of acknowledgment to that heir, provided the heir shall survive, claim their inheritance, and call upon the accord within the period of 1 generation. Consume or incorporate, Hermione had said. Not just kill. He killed your mother, who the test showed is Peverell descended, and then he used your blood in the resurrection ritual. 2 separate acts. The second one is the consumption. She'd looked up. This is already active, Harry. He's already bound. He just doesn't know it yet. What does the acknowledgement look like? Harry had asked. What does fealty of acknowledgement actually mean? That's the part I'm still working on, Hermione had said. And that was where they'd been for 4 days. Longbottom, Snape said, from directly behind Neville. Neville flinched. His knife slipped. He didn't cut himself, but the moth wings scattered across the bench. 5 points from Gryffindor, Snape said. His voice was the same temperature it always was, cold and precise, with no pleasure in it, which Harry had come to understand meant the cruelty was functional rather than sadistic. Snape used cruelty as a tool. Harry found this less offensive than cruelty for its own sake and more dangerous. Longbottom, if you cannot perform a basic cutting task without, the wings are fine, Harry said, without looking up from the cauldron. He'd finished the required quantity before they scattered. Look. A beat of silence. I didn't ask for your assessment, Potter. No, Harry agreed. I'm giving it anyway because Neville's potion is on track, and taking 5 points for a spill that doesn't affect the outcome seems like penalizing him for something other than his actual work. Another beat. Longer. Harry looked up. Snape was looking at him with the expression that was not quite recognition but was something adjacent to it, the expression Harry had catalogued as recalibrating. Up close, Snape's eyes were very dark and very sharp and, Harry noticed for the first time, tired in a way that was deep enough to be permanent. 2 points from Gryffindor, Snape said. For speaking out of turn. Fine, Harry said, and went back to the cauldron. 3 points net, versus the 5 Neville would have lost alone. He caught Neville's sideways look and gave a very small shrug. Neville gathered his moth wings. His hands had stopped shaking. After class, in the corridor, Neville said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "I know. You lost us points." 2, Harry said. "Worth it." Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, Gran says that people with power can either use it to protect or to dominate. She says most choose the second one because it's easier. He paused. "She'll want to meet you. Tell her I'll write when things are a bit further along," Harry said. "We've got work to do first." The work, in the days between Tuesday and Thursday, was Hermione tracking down the precise definition of fealty of acknowledgement in ancient magical law. She approached it the way she approached everything, systematically, cross-referenced, annotated, and she came to Harry on Wednesday evening with 3 books open simultaneously and an expression that was vibrating at the frequency of someone who has solved something that should have been impossible. "Fealty of acknowledgement in preministry magical law," she said, without preamble, dropping into the chair across from him, was a specific political instrument used between magical factions before the Wizengamot existed. When one faction captured or defeated a lord from an enemy house, they could invoke a sworn fealty, but it was expensive, magically speaking, to maintain. So the accord uses a different mechanism. She turned a book to face him. "Look at this." The passage was in translated Old English, annotated in Hermione's handwriting in the margins. "Fealty of acknowledgement doth not require continuous magical compulsion. It requires a single act, that the bound party, upon being summoned by the heir in full knowledge of the accord, shall present themselves and acknowledge, in word and action, the dominion of the heir in the matter of the original blood claim. This acknowledgement, once given, cannot be withdrawn. And until it is given, the accord shall create in the bound party a compulsion toward the heir, an awareness, an unease, a drawing that cannot be ignored indefinitely. A drawing, Harry said. He will be pulled toward you, Hermione said. Not controlled, not puppet on a string, but the accord creates a pressure. Every day it isn't resolved, the pressure increases. She tapped the last line. Cannot be ignored indefinitely. Eventually he'll have to act on it. He'll feel compelled to seek you out. That's why he kept coming after me, Ron said, very slowly, from the other armchair where he'd been listening. Every year, in the stories, I mean. Everyone always said he was obsessed with the prophecy. But what if it wasn't just the prophecy? What if the accord was pulling him and he didn't understand why? That's exactly what I think, Hermione said. He doesn't know about the accord. The full text was only in the Gringotts archive, the public records only have a summary, and the summary doesn't mention the consumption clause. He triggered it without knowing he triggered it. Harry sat back in his chair. He thought about Voldemort, not as a concept, not as a fear, but as a person making decisions without all the information, being pulled towards something by a force he couldn't identify and would hate to acknowledge. He thought about what that must feel like for someone whose entire identity was built on control and domination. He's going to be furious when he finds out, Harry said. Utterly, Hermione agreed. And he can't make it stop by killing me. The accord binds him to the moment of the blood consumption, it's already done. Killing me would just leave him bound to a dead heir with no way to resolve the compulsion. According to the text, the compulsion would intensify indefinitely after the heir's death, Hermione said. She looked slightly awed by this, in the way she looked when a piece of magic was either horrifying or brilliant, and this one was both. The brothers weren't playing around. No, Harry said. I don't suppose they were. He thought about the cloak upstairs in his trunk. He thought about the full Peverell inheritance and what it meant that three brothers had built something like this into the bedrock of British magic before the Ministry existed, before Hogwarts existed, when the magical world was still young enough to believe in permanent things. Can he invoke it? Harry asked. If he finds out about the accord, can he do anything to void it or transfer it? Hermione shook her head firmly. Blood magic is the most permanent form. There's no counter-clause, no dissolution mechanism. It can only be resolved by the acknowledgement. She paused. Or by both parties dying. But you can't die first, and he can't die of natural causes because of his Horcruxes. Harry looked at her. His what? Hermione's expression shifted, she'd said something she hadn't meant to say yet, or hadn't said in quite this order. I've been reading, she said carefully, about dark immortality magic. There are objects, theoretically, in which a dark wizard could fragment and store pieces of their soul. To prevent death. They're called Horcruxes. She met his eyes. I think that's what he's done. I don't have proof, but the magic aligns with everything we know about how he survived what should have killed him in your parents' house. The common room was warm and crowded, and someone nearby was laughing at something Fred or George Weasley had apparently just done. Normal sounds. Normal evening. How many? Harry asked. I don't know. The books on the subject are, she paused. There's only one book in the library that discusses them directly, and it's in the restricted section, and 3 pages have been removed from it. She said this with the expression of someone who finds the removal of library pages personally offensive. Someone removed them before I could read them. When? The book's checkout record goes back 40 years. The last person to take it out was, I couldn't read the name, it was blacked out. Harry was quiet. Dumbledore, Ron said. Possibly, Hermione said. Or someone Dumbledore authorized. Either way, someone decided that information should not be freely available to students. Right, Harry said. I'll ask him Thursday. Thursday evening came with the particular quality of evenings that have been anticipated, slightly over-present, the hours before them both too fast and too slow. Harry ate dinner without tasting much of it, went back to Gryffindor Tower to review his notes, and at 10 to 7 walked down to the 7th floor and the stone gargoyle that guarded the headmaster's office. "Lemon drop," he said. The gargoyle stepped aside with mechanical grace. The spiral staircase rose smoothly. Harry stepped onto it and rode it upward and thought, for the length of the ride, about what he wanted from this conversation and what he was willing to give. The office was circular, warm, populated by softly snoring portraits and the silver instruments Harry had no names for yet, all of them turning and clicking in their slow, purposeful ways. Dumbledore was standing by the window when Harry entered, looking out at the grounds with the slightly distant expression of someone whose thoughts are further away than their eyes. He turned when Harry came in, and his face arranged itself into something that was genuine rather than performed, a combination of warmth and uncertainty and, underneath both of those, the careful attention of someone who has been thinking hard about this moment and isn't entirely sure he's prepared. "Harry," he said. "Please, sit. Can I offer you anything? I have tea, and I believe Fawkes managed to steal some shortbread from the kitchens, although I choose not to investigate how." Harry sat. He accepted the tea because it was cold outside and the tea was good. He looked at Fawkes, who was on his perch and watching Harry with the intelligent, steady gaze of a very old creature who has seen a great many things and has opinions. "I'd like to start with a question," Harry said. "Of course," Dumbledore said. "Did you know my mother was Peverell descended?" Dumbledore wrapped both hands around his tea. The silver instruments turned. Outside, the grounds were dark and the lake was perfectly still. "I had a theory," he said. "When Lily's magic first manifested, when she was very young, before Hogwarts, it had a quality that her sisters did not. Her sister, as you know, showed no magic at all. 2 children from the same Muggle family, one with profound magical ability and one with none. That is not, by itself, unusual. But the nature of Lily's magic," he paused. "I found it interesting that a Muggle-born which could produce a protective charm so absolute that it repelled the most powerful dark wizard of his generation. The love theory is real and has merit. But I began to wonder whether there was more to her bloodline than the records showed." "But you had the abbreviated test done," Harry said. "Not the full one." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Yes." "Why?" Another pause. "Longer." "Because," Dumbledore said, with the particular difficulty of a man accustomed to the long view being asked to justify decisions in the short term, "I was afraid of what the full test might reveal. Not for my sake, or not only for my sake, but because I believed, perhaps arrogantly, that knowledge of that magnitude could put you in more danger than you were already in." He met Harry's eyes. "I was managing your safety, Harry. I was doing it imperfectly, and I was doing it without your consent, and I will not pretend that was entirely right simply because it was entirely well-intentioned." Harry looked at him. "You had my father's cloak for 10 years. I did. And the connection between my family and your own, the last line on the test result. House Dumbledore." Harry watched the headmaster's face. Pending disclosure or abdication. Dumbledore was quiet. In his portraits, his predecessors watched from their frames with various expressions of curiosity and concern and, in one case, deliberate inattention that was itself a kind of attentiveness. "The Evans-Blackwood line," Dumbledore said quietly, "connects through several generations to a collateral branch of the Dumbledore family. The connection is distant. I discovered it approximately 12 years ago." He looked at the fire. "I did not disclose it because to disclose it would have drawn attention to your mother's bloodline at a time when you were not safe, and when that attention would have been dangerous. Voldemort would have found out about the Peverell connection," Harry said. "Yes. He would have been more motivated to kill me, not less." "Yes. Although," Dumbledore stopped. He seemed to be choosing words with the care of someone who has broken things in the past with careless language. There is also the matter of the accord. I knew about the Peverell Accord, Harry. I have known about it for many years. I believe that if he discovered the Accord's existence before you had claimed your inheritance, he would find a way to circumvent it. He is very intelligent, and very motivated, and the Accord has a specific vulnerability. It requires the heir to have claimed their inheritance, Harry said. If he destroyed me before I claimed, there's no heir to invoke it. Precisely. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was not quite surprise but was its adjacent neighbor. You've worked through the full text. Hermione worked through the full text. I worked through the implications. Harry set down his tea. There's something else I want to ask you about. Pages removed from a restricted section book. On the subject of Horcruxes. The word landed in the room with the silence of something heavy dropped in still water. Fawkes shifted on his perch. One of the silver instruments gave a single soft chime and went still. Where did you encounter that term? Dumbledore asked. His voice was even, but it had changed quality. Hermione found the book. Someone removed 3 pages. She described the subject to me and I've been thinking about it since. Harry looked at him steadily. He can't die of natural causes. The accord can only be resolved or left permanent. If it's left permanent and he can't die, the compulsion never ends. Which means either the Horcruxes are destroyed before the accord is invoked, or, what? He spends the rest of a very long life being pulled toward me. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. You are, he said finally, 11 years old. Almost 12, Harry said. Does that change the answer? Something shifted in Dumbledore's face, the careful management of it eased slightly, and what came through underneath was something much more human, a kind of exhausted respect for reality, the expression of a man who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and can feel it being redistributed without having asked for it. There are 7, Dumbledore said. Harry counted in his head. 6 remaining, Dumbledore said, before Harry could say it. The 7th piece is what animates him. To destroy him permanently, the Horcruxes must be destroyed first. He paused. I have been trying to identify them for years. I have found one. A diary, which I believe he used during his time at Hogwarts as a student. It is currently hidden. Where? Somewhere he cannot reach it. Where, Professor? Dumbledore looked at him. Looked at him in the real way, not the managing way, and said, in the Chamber of Secrets. Harry was quiet. He opened the chamber when he was a student here, Dumbledore said. The diary was hidden there by the portrait of himself he left behind in the magic. A younger version of himself, stored in the enchanted diary, able to act through it. He paused. I have sealed the chamber. The diary is contained. But I have not destroyed it because I have not yet determined, I was not certain, that it was a Horcrux and not simply a powerful dark artifact. It's a Horcrux, Harry said. Dumbledore regarded him. How can you be certain? Because everything else fits, Harry said. Because the pattern you've just described, a piece of himself stored in an object, capable of acting independently to restore him, that's exactly what the theory describes. And because you wouldn't have sealed the chamber rather than destroying the diary unless you were afraid that destroying it without understanding it fully might do something you couldn't undo. He paused. Am I wrong? A long pause. No, Dumbledore said softly. You are not wrong. Harry picked up his tea again. Drank some. The fire crackled. Outside, the grounds continued their dark silence. I'd like to make a proposal, Harry said. Dumbledore waited. You have information I need. I have, apparently, a position that gives me options you don't have. The Wizengamot seats, the accord, the fact that I'm going to have a significant political footprint in Wizarding Britain whether I want it or not. He looked at the headmaster. I'm not interested in being managed. I'm not interested in being kept in the dark until you decide it's the right time. I'm 11, you're right, but I'm the one the accord binds to, and I'm the one who's going to have to claim the seats and face him at some point. So I'd rather do it with full information than with a careful selection of it. What are you proposing, exactly? Dumbledore asked. Tell me the truth when I ask for it, Harry said. Don't give me the abridged version. If you think something is too dangerous for me to know, tell me that and tell me why, and give me the chance to disagree. If I think you're wrong about the danger, I'll tell you that, and we can argue about it. He paused. I'd rather argue with you than find out things you decided I shouldn't know, because I'll find out anyway and it'll just be worse. The portraits were listening with undisguised interest. One of them, a dumpy witch in the third portrait from the left, was leaning so far forward she was at risk of falling out of her frame. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Your mother, he said, argued exactly the way you do. Precise, structured, and with a patience that made it feel like the conversation could only go one way. He was quiet for a moment. I miss her very much. Harry said nothing. He let that sit. All right, Dumbledore said. I accept your proposal. With one condition, if I believe a piece of information constitutes an immediate physical danger to you, I will tell you that it exists and flag it as restricted temporarily. Not permanently. Temporarily. And you retain the right to push back. That's fair, Harry said. Then we have an agreement. They sat for another hour. Dumbledore talked, really talked, in the way Harry suspected he rarely did, about the Horcruxes he'd identified and the ones he hadn't, about the Accord and what its activation might look like, about the wizarding political structure and what 14 Wizengamot seats could realistically accomplish. Harry asked questions and pushed back twice and was right once and wrong once, and both times Dumbledore engaged with the actual argument rather than the authority difference between them, which Harry found was the most meaningful thing the headmaster could have done. When Harry finally stood to leave, Fawkes made a sound, not a full song, just a phrase of one, short and warm. He likes you, Dumbledore said. Good, Harry said. I like him. He walked back down the spiral staircase and through the castle corridors and up to Gryffindor Tower, where Ron was asleep and Hermione was still awake reading by the last ember of the fire, and he sat down across from her. How was it? She asked. Good, he said. He told me about the Horcruxes. There are 7 total, 1 destroyed, 1 in the chamber. He doesn't know where the others are yet. Hermione closed her book slowly. Her expression was the particular one she wore when information was both more and less than she'd expected. And the Accord? He knew about it. He was protecting it by keeping my bloodline hidden. Harry leaned back. He also said Voldemort doesn't know the Accord exists. He triggered it blind. So right now, Hermione said carefully, Voldemort is bound by ancient magic, doesn't know what it is, can't resolve it, can't die because of the Horcruxes, and is currently a barely present spirit attached to Quirrell's head in this very castle. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. Yeah, Harry said. Roughly. Somewhere in the castle below them, somewhere in the dungeons, in the dark, in a room that shared space with a corridor and a locked door on the 3rd floor, something shifted. Harry felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, not quite heard and not quite felt, but registered by some instrument in the body that doesn't have a name. He thought about what Ironmaw had said. An awareness, an unease, a drawing that cannot be ignored indefinitely. He thought about Voldemort in the castle with him, bound to a man with a purple turban and a nervous face, pulled toward Harry by a compulsion he couldn't name or explain or control, getting closer to the thing it was written in ancient magic that he could not avoid. He can feel it, Harry said quietly. The Accord. He can feel it pulling and he doesn't know what it is. How do you know? Hermione asked. Because it goes both ways, Harry said. Not the compulsion, that's only on his end. But I can feel something. A pressure in the opposite direction. Like standing on 2 sides of a magnet. Hermione was very still. That's not in the text. No, Harry agreed. It's not in any text. It's just what's happening. He looked at the dark fireplace. He's afraid of it. Whatever he's feeling, it's making him afraid. The castle was quiet around them. The portraits in the common room slept. Outside, the Scottish night was cold and full of stars. Harry, Hermione said, carefully. Yeah. We need to be ready. Whatever the accord pulls toward, the acknowledgement, it's going to come. Maybe not this year. Maybe not at his full power. But it's coming, and it's going to be the most frightening thing either of us has ever seen. She paused. And you need to be standing when it happens. Standing and not running. I know, Harry said. Do you? He looked at her. Hermione Granger, 2 months into a friendship, sitting in an emberdark common room with her book on her lap and her eyes very steady and her voice doing the thing it did when she was genuinely afraid but had decided the fear wasn't going to be in charge. I'm not afraid of him, Hermione, Harry said. It wasn't bravado. It was just true, in the same way that certain facts are true, bluntly, without needing to be dressed up. I understand that I should be. I know what he is and what he's done. But the accord doesn't run on my fear. It runs on the blood, and the blood's already done its job. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said, finally. Okay. I believe you. She opened her book again. I'm still going to keep researching. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She smiled at her book without looking up. It was small and quick, but it was there. Harry went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to Ron's breathing and Neville's occasional murmur and the castle settling around them. More actions. Right, the next chapter now, The Blood of 14 Thrones. Chapter 4, Parliament of Lords. The letter from the Ministry arrived on a Monday in early February, which Harry thought was precisely the kind of timing that wasn't accidental. It came not by school owl but by a ministry bird, sleek grey, official bearing, a red wax seal on the envelope with the crossed wands insignia. It landed on the Gryffindor table between Harry's porridge and his copy of Wizengamot Procedure, a practical guide, which Hermione had sourced through a special order and which Harry had nearly finished. Ron noticed the seal first. That's official ministry correspondence. I can see that, Harry said, and opened it. The letter was formal in the way that things written by people who want to seem more powerful than they are tend to be formal, overly structured, heavy on titles, light on substance. It was signed by one Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, and it informed Harry James Potter that given the recent documentation received from Gringotts Bank regarding his inheritance status, the Ministry of Magic hereby requested his presence at a formal Wizengamot session to be held on the 14th of February for the purposes of reviewing said inheritance claims and determining their legal validity under current wizarding law. Requested his presence was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Harry read it twice. Then he passed it to Hermione, who read it with her eyes moving quickly and her expression going progressively cooler. They said reviewing and determining validity, she said. As if the Gringotts authentication is subject to their approval. It isn't, Harry said. Ironmaw was clear about that. Gringotts documentation is not challengeable by the ministry. They know that, Hermione said. This isn't a legal challenge. It's a power display. They want you in that chamber on their terms, surrounded by their people, before you've formally claimed anything, so they can define the conversation before you can. Valentine's Day, Ron said, with feeling. Focus, Ron, Hermione said. I am focused, Ron said. I'm focused on the fact that the ministry summoned Harry on Valentine's Day, which is either deeply unromantic or a deliberate choice to make it harder for him to bring support because everyone will assume it's a personal errand. Harry and Hermione both looked at him. That's a good point, Harry said. Ron looked pleased in the way he looked pleased when his instincts turned out to be correct, which was approximately the face of someone who doesn't often get to be right but is very good at it when he is. Harry wrote his reply that evening. He did not write to the ministry. He wrote to Ironmaw. The Ministry has summoned me to a Wizengamot session on the 14th to review my claims. I intend to attend. I intend to formally claim all active seats at that session rather than waiting for a scheduled claiming procedure, as I believe allowing the Ministry to control the timing is strategically inadvisable. Can you confirm that claiming in an active session is legally valid under ancient procedure? If so, I will need the formal claiming instruments, the authenticated heritage documents in multiple copies, and your presence or the presence of a Gringotts representative as independent witness. Also, please advise whether Neville Longbottom's adjacent claim to Leo Degrance has been confirmed, as I would like him present if possible. He sent it. He wrote a second letter to Ironmaw's recommended solicitor, a witch named Aldera Vance who operated out of Edinburgh and had, according to Ironmaw's notes, successfully argued 3 ancient house cases against Ministry opposition in the past decade. She replied within 2 days, brisk and precise, confirming that yes, ancient claiming procedure absolutely permitted a claim in open Wizengamot session, in fact, that was the original method, pre-Ministry, and the Ministry's preferred alternative of submitting paperwork through a bureaucratic review process was itself a modern invention with no standing against ancient law. They prefer the paperwork method, she wrote, because it gives them 6 to 8 months of deliberation during which they can lose documents, challenge technicalities, and generally obstruct until the claimant either gives up or concedes points. In open session, under ancient procedure, with authenticated Gringotts documentation and a Goblin witness, they have no legitimate mechanism to delay. Come to London, Mr. Potter. I'll meet you at the Ministry entrance at 9 o'clock. Harry told Dumbledore the plan. Dumbledore sat with it for a moment longer than Harry expected, which meant he was genuinely thinking rather than diplomatically pausing. The Ministry will not be pleased, he said. No, Harry agreed. Fudge will attempt to control the session. He can try. Another pause. Then Dumbledore said, with the particular precision of someone choosing to support something they have reservations about because they respect the person choosing it, I will be present as a member of the Wizengamot. I will not intervene unless the session becomes procedurally improper. But I will be there. Thank you, Harry said. Take Granger's research, Dumbledore said. She has done exceptional work and you'll want it in hand. Already planned, Harry said. The fortnight before the 14th was the most concentrated period of preparation Harry had ever done for anything. Every evening after dinner, in the corner by the fire, they worked. Hermione drilled him on Wizengamot procedure with the focused intensity of a chess player preparing openings, not just the rules, but the edge cases, the ancient precedences, the moments where procedure and power diverged and you needed to know which one would win. Ron played fudge and mock arguments, which he did with such committed accuracy, pompous, evasive, status-obsessed, that Harry had to try hard not to laugh during the actual preparation. Neville read every document related to the Leo Degrance connection and arrived one Thursday with a letter from his grandmother that was 12 pages long and confirmed, in Augusta Longbottom's precise and uncompromising hand, that yes, the Longbottom family had records of the Leo Degrance connection going back 300 years and she had never brought it forward because she had never been certain whether to trust the Ministry's claiming process. I am now informed, the letter concluded, that there is an alternative. Neville will attend. Do not let them bully you, Mr. Potter. I have met Cornelius Fudge, and he is precisely as small as he appears. Harry liked Augusta Longbottom enormously, sight unseen. Ironmaw confirmed everything. He would send a junior representative, a goblin named Sharpcoin, who was apparently considered something of a rising specialist in interspecies legal documentation, to attend as Gringotts' independent witness. He would also send the formal claiming instruments by secure courier, which arrived on the 11th, a flat leather case similar to the heritage documentation case, but heavier, sealed with a Gringotts impression that gave off a faint warmth when Harry held it. The night before the 14th, Harry sat on the edge of his bed and looked at what they had. 14 authenticated house claims. 1 confirmed adjacent claim for Neville. Aldera Vance as solicitor. Sharpcoin from Gringotts as independent witness. Hermione's 3 inches of annotated procedural notes, organized with color tabs. Ron's moral support, which was not to be underestimated. Dumbledore present but hands off. And Harry himself, who had spent 3 months reading everything anyone had ever written about the Wizengamot, the ancient houses, and the Ministry's preferred methods of managing situations it didn't want to manage. He thought about the Dursleys. About Petunia's specific look of contempt when she told him he was nothing. About the years of that, the accumulated, patient, institutional weight of being told you don't matter and can't matter and shouldn't bother thinking otherwise. He wasn't angry about it. Not exactly. It was more that he'd collected it all into something useful, into a very clear picture of the distance between what people said about him and what was actually true, and a resulting preference for doing things himself rather than waiting for someone else to decide it was time. Let's see what you all do next, he'd thought in the taxi coming back from Diagon Alley. Now he was about to find out. He packed the leather cases carefully. He went to sleep at a reasonable hour. He did not lie awake catastrophizing, because catastrophizing was not a productive use of time and the catastrophe would either happen or it wouldn't, and either way he'd need to be rested to deal with it. He slept well. The morning of the 14th, they took the Floo from Dumbledore's office to the Ministry atrium, Harry first, then Neville, Ron and Hermione after. Floo travel turned out to be exactly as undignified as advertised. Harry came out of the green flames in the Ministry atrium, immediately inhaled a faceful of ash, and was caught by the elbow by a small, efficient witch in blue robes who said, without breaking stride, "You're Potter." "I'm Vance. Welcome to the Ministry, don't touch anything without my say-so." Aldera Vance was about 40, with the precise, economical movements of someone who charged by the hour and didn't waste any of them. She had sharp grey eyes and very good posture and the focused readiness of someone who had been in difficult rooms before and hadn't lost yet. "Nice to meet you," Harry said. "Likewise. You've read the procedure?" "Twice." "Good. Follow my lead on timing, there are moments where the sequence matters and I'll indicate when. You speak when you're ready, not when they prompt you. Don't let them set your pace." She looked him up and down with brisk assessment. "You're smaller than I expected." "People keep saying that," Harry said. "They usually mean it as a warning." Vance almost smiled. "I mean it as information. The Wizengamot chamber is arranged so the claiming party stands at the floor. Everyone else is elevated. It's a deliberate psychological construction. Don't let it land." "It won't," Harry said. Sharp Coin was waiting by the lifts, shorter than any other figure in the atrium, immaculate in Gringotts green, with a flat document case under his arm and the particular expression of a goblin who has assessed every human being within eye line and found them, collectively, adequate. He gave Harry a short nod that felt, coming from a Gringotts representative, like a full letter of endorsement. "All documentation is in order," Sharp Coin said. 14 claims, authenticated. The Longbottom Leodegrance adjacent claim is conditionally authenticated pending the session's witness formality, which is standard procedure. He paused. "Iron Maw sends his regards and says to tell you, the scales are level." "What does that mean?" Ron asked. "It means the evidence is solid," Harry said. He looked at Sharp Coin. "Tell him thank you." They took the lift down. The Ministry of Magic's lower levels had a specific atmosphere, not quite oppressive, but deliberate. The architecture said, "We are ancient, we are serious, and you are a visitor here." Harry looked at it the way he looked at Snape's classroom, as information about what it was trying to make him feel, which was itself useful. The Wizengamot chamber was through a set of double doors wide enough for 3 people abreast. They were dark wood, very old, with brass fittings. 2 witches in ministry robes stood on either side, and they stiffened slightly when Harry's group approached, not quite hostile, but with the particular stiffness of people who have been briefed and are trying to look as if they haven't been. Vance didn't break stride. Aldera Vance, solicitor, for Harrison James Potter, recognized heir to 14 ancient houses and holder of authenticated Gringotts documentation. My client invokes ancient claiming procedure under the original Wizengamot charter. Please stand aside. The doors opened. The Wizengamot chamber was a rough oval, tiered stone seating rising on all sides, occupied by witches and wizards in plum robes, most of them older, most of them watching the entrance with varying degrees of barely concealed interest. The chamber was lit by floating lights, and in the center of the floor, the lowest point, as Vance had said, deliberately, was a cleared space with a single wooden speaking podium. And at the top tier, directly opposite the entrance, behind a bench that was elevated enough to make the psychology obvious, Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. Fudge was a short, rotund man with a lime green bowler hat that he was, Harry noticed immediately, holding rather than wearing, a defensive posture, something to hold on to. He had the face of a man who has spent his career managing things and has recently encountered something he doesn't know how to manage. Beside him was a woman Harry didn't recognize yet, blonde, all in pink, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had a clipboard. She was watching Harry with an attention that felt less like interest and more like cataloging. Dumbledore was seated to the left, in the senior members' tier, in plum robes that looked exactly like everyone else's, wearing them with the air of someone who has been in every room in the building and is mildly interested in what happens next. Harry walked to the speaking podium. Neville stood slightly behind and to his left, present, visible, steady. Hermione and Ron took seats in the observers' gallery with Vance, who had a legal right to floor access but had agreed with Harry beforehand that she'd stay back unless procedure was violated. Sharp Coin stood at the independent witness position, a designated spot at the chamber's east wall, traditional and recognized, which several members of the Wizengamot had clearly not expected to see occupied by a goblin. Fudge cleared his throat. "We are convened today for the purpose of reviewing the inheritance claim submitted by, reviewing," said Harry, pleasantly, into the silence. Fudge stopped. "I want to make sure we have the right word," Harry continued. "My solicitor has confirmed, and I believe most of the members of this chamber know, that Gringotts authentication documents are not subject to review by the Wizengamot. They are legally binding under the original charter of both institutions." He looked up at Fudge. "So I'm not here for a review. I'm here to invoke ancient claiming procedure and formally seat myself in the house positions to which I am entitled. That is a different process." The chamber was very quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture. "Yes, well," Fudge started. "The claiming request is in order," said a voice from the senior members' tier. Not Dumbledore, another wizard, older, with a lined face and the permanent tiredness of someone who has been trying to hold things together for too long. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who knows the rules because she spent 30 years writing them. "The original charter is clear. We proceed." Fudge looked at her. His bowler hat was suffering. "Thank you," Harry said. He opened the flat leather case. He laid the 14 authenticated claim documents on the podium in the order Hermione had organized them, by seniority of house, oldest first. He looked out at the tiered seats and the plum robes and the collection of people who ran the wizarding world, most of whom had been running it in the same direction for a very long time, and felt something settle in him, not aggression, not nerves, just the clean readiness of a person who has done the preparation and trusts it. "I am Harrison James Potter," he said. "I am the authenticated heir to House Potter, ancient and noble. I claim the seat." "Witnessed," said Sharp Coin, from the east wall, in a voice that filled the chamber without apparent effort. Harry picked up the second document. "I am the authenticated heir to House Peverell, ancient and most noble. I claim the seat." "Witnessed. I am the authenticated heir to House Gryffindor, ancient and most noble." "One moment," said the woman in pink, from beside Fudge. Her voice was sweet in the way that things described as sweet in stories are usually also described as dangerous. "Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. I believe we ought to examine the methodology of the Gringotts test before proceeding through the full list. There are questions about the validity of blood tests for dormant lines, the validity of Gringotts blood tests," said Vance, from the observer's gallery, without standing up, without raising her voice, was established by the Magical Creatures and Interspecies Accord of 1752, which predates the current ministry by 23 years and cannot be superseded by ministry legislation. I'd be happy to provide the statute reference if the Undersecretary needs it. I know the reference, Umbridge said, still smiling. Then use it, Vance said pleasantly. Umbridge's smile stayed in place. Her eyes did something else. Harry picked up the document again. House Gryffindor, ancient and most noble. I claim the seat. Witnessed. He worked through the list. Each name, each house, landed in the chamber like a stone dropped in deep water, the ripples going out and out. He watched faces as he went. Amelia Bones was expressionless in the way that professional people are expressionless when they're paying very close attention. Two older members in the back tier were leaning together and murmuring. One, a narrow-faced wizard Harry would later learn was called Lucius Malfoy, who was present as a ministry observer, had gone from composed to something rather more rigid halfway through the list and had not recovered. House Ravenclaw. House Hufflepuff. House Blackwood. House Peverells. The Peverells claim, Fudge said, finding his footing again, is listed as contested. In the presence of a contested claim, your procedure requires, Vance said, from her gallery seat, that the competing claimant be present to formally contest. In the absence of that claimant, she paused, letting the absence hang there, the claim is held by the party present and documented. The competing claimant may petition within 60 days. If he would like to petition, he is welcome to present himself to this chamber. She let that sit. Nobody in the chamber said anything for a moment. The image of Voldemort presenting himself to the Wizengamot to contest a goblin blood claim was, Harry suspected, comprehensively stopping most of the room's thinking processes. Witnessed, said Sharp Coin, with the air of someone who has not just made a devastating legal argument but appreciates one. House Emery's. This one produced a different silence. Not the political silence of people calculating positions, a different kind, older, the silence of people confronted with something outside their category of expected things. Harry had been waiting for it. He held it for a moment before moving on. House Pendragon. Amelia Bones made a sound that might have been entirely involuntary. She pressed her lips together immediately, but it had happened. Harry appreciated her for it. House Flammel. House Leo Degrance. House Ollivander Branch. The final claim in today's session, Harry said, is the House Leo Degrance adjacent claim for Neville Frank Longbottom, whose Gringotts authenticated connection to that house was confirmed this week. He looked at Neville. Neville. Neville stepped forward. He was not, Harry noticed, shaking. He had the look of someone who had been nervous for 2 weeks and had burned through it somewhere around yesterday afternoon, and was now operating on the other side of nerves where things become simply what they are. He was standing up straight in a way he didn't always stand up straight, and his voice, when he said the words, was clear. I am Neville Frank Longbottom. I am the authenticated adjacent heir to House Leo Degrance, ancient and noble. I claim the seat. Witnessed, said Sharp Coin. Harry looked at Fudge. Fudge had the look of a man watching something happen that he had been told by several people would not happen. His bowler hat was being compressed in both hands with considerable force. The claims are procedurally complete, Amelia Bones said, into the resulting quiet. Under the original charter, they are recognized. The seats are vested. She looked at Fudge. Minister. Fudge opened his mouth. Then closed it. Minister, Bones said again, with the precision of someone who has stopped asking. Recognized, Fudge said, through what appeared to be a physical effort. Harry looked at the 14 authenticated documents on the podium. He stacked them neatly. He put them back in the leather case. Thank you, he said to the chamber at large. Then, because it was true, I'd like to use the floor briefly, if the chamber will permit it. Not as a claimant, as a seated member. Bones looked at the procedural question. The charter permits newly seated members to address the chamber at the claiming session, she said. It's rarely invoked. It's never been invoked for 14 simultaneous claims, Harry said. I'd appreciate the latitude. Bones almost smiled. The floor is yours, Lord Potter. Lord Potter. The title landed oddly, not unpleasantly, just unexpectedly, the way a new coat fits when you've never owned one before. Harry didn't react to it. He just nodded and turned to face the full chamber. I'm 11 years old, he said. I'm aware that several of you are waiting for me to be overwhelmed by this situation, or to make a mistake, or to defer to someone more experienced until I'm old enough to be taken seriously. He paused. I'm not going to do that. Not because I think I know everything, I don't, and I'm going to keep learning for as long as this takes, but because the reason this situation exists is that nobody with a seat in this chamber has adequately addressed it for 10 years. He's still out there. He's weakened but not gone. His followers are in this building and in your social circles and in positions of institutional authority, and the legislation that was supposed to prevent that has gaps you could walk a dragon through. The woman in pink had stopped smiling. I have 14 seats, Harry continued, his voice even, unhurried. I intend to use them. Not to dominate this chamber, I have no interest in running the wizarding world, I have school on Monday, but to make specific, targeted changes to specific, targetable problems. Starting with 3 pieces of legislation that I'd like to bring to a vote today, as is my right under ancient charter for a newly seated member at their claiming session. That right, Umbridge said, sweetly, has not been exercised in 700 years, Harry said. Yes. My solicitor found the precedent. Would you like the citation? Umbridge said nothing. The first item, Harry said, and looked at the chamber, is a motion to establish an independent review of the Azkaban sentencing records for any prisoner convicted without trial after the first defeat of Voldemort. The name. In this room. Several people flinched, not all of them, but enough to identify themselves. The second item is a motion to create an independent oversight body for the Aura Department, reporting to the Wizengamot rather than the Minister's office, with the specific mandate of investigating claims of evidence fabrication in trials conducted between 1981 and 1985. Lucius Malfoy, in the Observer's Gallery, had gone very still. The third item is a motion to formally register and index all known Death Eater pardons issued after 1981 on the grounds of the Imperious Defense, and to require that those registrations be subject to public record. The chamber had the quality of air before lightning. Not chaos, something more controlled than chaos, the controlled tension of a room full of people who are either calculating or afraid and occasionally both. These are, Fudge said, his voice finding something closer to solidity, extremely, the sensitivity of, their procedural motions, Harry said. I'm a seated member. I'm bringing them to a vote. That's how it works. The chamber will vote, Bones said. Her voice had the flatness of someone who knows exactly what she's doing and has been waiting for permission to do it for a long time. The votes went as follows. The Azkaban Review passed, 43 to 29, with several notable abstentions from the block of members who had been, visibly, glancing at Lucius Malfoy throughout. The Aura Oversight Body passed, 51 to 21. Bones voted yes before anyone else. The Death Eater Pardon Registry was 47 to 25. Harry watched each vote. He watched which way every hand went. He filed it all away. He would write up a list tonight, who voted which way, what it suggested about their positions, what they were afraid of, what they wanted. Hermione, in the gallery, was writing furiously. Ron, beside her, had the look of someone watching a very good chess player make a sequence of moves and is only now seeing where the game has been going. Dumbledore, in the senior tier, was looking at his hands. Harry looked at him, just briefly. Just long enough for Dumbledore to look up and meet his eyes. The headmaster gave him a very small nod. Not approval exactly, something older than approval. Something between recognition and relief. Harry looked away. If there's no further business, Vance said, from the gallery, with the precision of someone snapping a briefcase shut, my client will return to his education. The Gringotts representative will file today's proceedings with the Independent Witness Registry. Any challenges to today's claims must be submitted in writing within 60 days, to Gringotts directly, not to the ministry. That's not the standard, Umbridge started. That's the charter procedure, Vance said. Good day. They left through the same wide double doors they'd come in through. Harry carried the leather case. Neville walked beside him. Hermione fell in on Harry's other side, still writing. Ron was behind them doing something that might have been a victory walk and might have been just how he walked when he was pleased. In the corridor outside, away from the chamber and its plum robes and its politics, Sharpcoin stopped and faced Harry. The scales held, he said. They did, Harry agreed. Iron Maw will want a full account. Tell him I'll write tonight. Harry paused. Tell him also, the Peverells contest. He doesn't have 60 days. The timeline is going to be different from what the charter assumes. Sharpcoin looked at him with the attentive assessment that was, Harry had learned, the highest form of goblin regard. He will understand the implication, Sharpcoin said. Good. The lift was waiting. They got in, all of them, slightly compressed, and as the gates closed, Ron let out a sound that had been clearly building since the chamber. 43 to 29, he said. 43. Do you know how long people have been trying to get an Azkaban review? My dad says it's been discussed for years and never gotten past committee. It never had the votes before, Harry said. It never had you before, Ron said, with the direct, simple loyalty that was his most specific quality, the loyalty that didn't dress itself up in anything, just said what it meant. That was, Harry, that was brilliant. Harry thought about it. It was a start, he said. You called him by name, Neville said quietly. In the chamber. People flinched. They needed to, Harry said. If I'd avoided the name, they'd have known I was performing confidence rather than having it. Are you? Neville asked. Having it, I mean. Harry thought about the question honestly, the way he always tried to think about honest questions. I don't think I'm afraid of him, he said. I think I understand that he's dangerous and I take that seriously. But afraid, he shook his head. I keep looking for the fear and it's not quite there. It's like being afraid of a fire. You can respect the fire and still intend to put it out. The lift moved upward through the ministry's floors. Somewhere above them, the atrium and the flue and the route back to Hogwarts. Hermione looked up from her notes. I've got all 48 votes recorded with names. Perfect, Harry said. And I noticed something, she said. 3 of the no votes on all 3 motions were from members who voted yes on ministry oversight bills 2 years ago. They've changed position recently. Pressure, Harry said. Someone got to them between 2 years ago and now. I think so too. She tapped her notes. Someone with enough influence to flip 3 votes. I'd like to know who. It's Malfoy, Ron said, immediately, with the confidence of someone naming the obvious. It's always Malfoy. Probably, Harry agreed. But I want evidence, not probability. I'll look, Hermione said, already writing again. They came out into the atrium. Harry stood for a moment in the center of it, the high ceiling, the golden fountain with its problematic iconography, the witches and wizards moving through on their various ministry errands. He thought about all the ways this place had been used, for how long, to manage and suppress and defer and obstruct. He thought about being 11 years old in a too large shirt. He thought, I'm not finished. Flue? Ron asked. Flue, Harry said, and walked toward the fireplaces. Behind them, still in the corridor outside the Wizengamot chamber, Cornelius Fudge was having a conversation with Dolores Umbridge that was not going particularly well for either of them. His hat had not recovered from the morning. Umbridge's smile had, which was in some ways worse. And in the Wizengamot chamber itself, now emptied of everyone except the cleaning staff and one lingering portrait that was too interested to leave, Dumbledore sat in the senior tier for a few minutes after everyone had gone, in the quiet, with his hands on the bench in front of him. He thought about Lily Evans, who had walked into his office at 17 with 3 pieces of evidence she'd assembled herself and an argument he hadn't been able to defeat. He thought about James Potter, who had never once in his life accepted a situation he hadn't chosen without at minimum arguing about it at length. He thought about how afraid he'd been, for 10 years, that knowing the truth too early would break Harry. Would make him brittle or reckless or crushed. He thought about 43 to 29. He sat in the empty chamber and permitted himself, privately, to be thoroughly and completely wrong about something, and to find it, this time, this once, an extraordinary relief. Then he stood up, straightened his plum robes, and went to find a very long letter's worth of things to think about on the journey back to school. Chapter 5, The Bowit came on a Thursday night in May. Harry felt it before anything happened, the pressure he'd been aware of since October, the magnet pull that lived somewhere below conscious thought, sharpened all at once into something acute. He was in the library finishing an essay on switching spells when it hit him, and he put his quill down and sat very still for a moment and listened to what the feeling was telling him. Not danger, exactly. Not the hot-wire tension of immediate threat. Something else. Something that had been building for months and had just reached the point where it couldn't hold its own weight any longer. He packed his bag. He left the library. Hermione caught him in the corridor outside, because Hermione was almost always in the vicinity of the library at this hour and had the particular sensitivity to his moods that came from months of working in close quarters with someone. "What's wrong?" she said. "Nothing's wrong," Harry said. "Something's happening. The accord, I can feel it." He stopped walking. Thought about it. He's been pushed to the edge of something. Whatever the compulsion does to him, the pressure, it's become unbearable. He looked at her. Tonight. Hermione's expression went through several things quickly and settled on focused. Should I get Ron? Get Ron. Get Neville. He paused. Don't get anyone else. I don't want this turned into a spectacle. She was already moving. He went to Dumbledore's office first, because Dumbledore needed to know, and because their agreement was built on the premise that Harry didn't act on major developments without a conversation. The gargoyle stepped aside before he said the password, either it recognized him by now or it had standing instructions, Harry wasn't sure which. He went up. Dumbledore was awake. He was standing at the window again, the way he'd been standing the first time Harry had come here, and Harry had a sudden sense that Dumbledore spent a great deal of time at windows, watching the grounds, waiting for things he'd set in motion to arrive. I know, Dumbledore said, before Harry spoke. You can feel it too. Not the accord, I have no connection to it. But Quirrell left the castle 20 minutes ago. He turned from the window. His face was difficult to read, which meant he was reading himself as much as managing outward expression. He went toward the Forbidden Forest. Harry thought about Quirrell, the nervous face, the purple turban, the flinching quality, the repeated sideways looks in the great hall. He'd kept his distance from Quirrell all year, not from fear but from the same logic that made you not poke something volatile before you needed to. The thing living in the back of Quirrell's skull was still weak, still dependent, still barely more than a presence and a will. But the accord didn't care about power levels. It worked on what was, not what had been. He's coming to me, Harry said. The accord is pulling him and he stopped being able to resist it. He looked at Dumbledore. What does he look like? Without the turban. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Like something that has rejected its own humanity so thoroughly that the shape of what remains is defined entirely by what it chose over that humanity. He paused. Like someone who made every choice that led here voluntarily, and knows it. Harry nodded. He turned to go. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was not sharp, not commanding. Just present. The accord compels the acknowledgement. It does not compel anything after. Whatever you do after, whatever you say, that is yours. I know, Harry said. Be certain of what you want from this, Dumbledore said. Not what the magic wants. What you want. Harry stopped at the door. Thought about it genuinely. I want him to understand, Harry said, that there's a cost. Not just to the accord. To continuing. He paused. And I want to see if he's intelligent enough to calculate it. He went. Ron and Neville were in the corridor at the bottom of the stairs, Ron with his wand out already and Neville holding his with the steadiness that Harry had noticed was becoming his default. Hermione was with them, her bag over her shoulder, notes already in hand because Hermione Granger did not go into significant magical situations without her notes. Forest, Harry said. Figured, Ron said. They went. The castle at night was its own country, corridors emptied out, the paintings shifted in their frames with the drowsy attention of people half asleep, the torches burning lower and warmer. Harry moved through it without hesitation, not running but not slow, and the others matched his pace without being asked. He noticed this and filed it, 3 people who had made a decision about where they stood and were demonstrating it through the most basic physical language available. The entrance hall doors were unlocked, Quirrell would have gone through here, and hadn't needed to force anything. Harry pushed them open into the cool May night. The grounds were clear. Stars overhead, thick and unobstructed, the lake very still. The forbidden forest rose at the edge of the grounds, dark and absolute, the tree line a solid boundary between the world of the school and whatever lived in the older dark beyond it. Harry could feel the direction like a compass needle. Not toward the forest proper, toward the edge of it, the near margin where the trees were sparse enough to let through moonlight. He walked toward it and the others came with him, and none of them spoke, because the night had a quality that didn't want breaking. They were 30 feet from the tree line when Quirrell stepped out. In the dark and moonlight, the transformation was visible. Quirrell's body moved wrong, not the nervous, apologetic shuffle of the classroom but something else, something that was using the body like a borrowed instrument and not bothering to maintain the performance anymore. His hands hung at his sides. The turban was gone. On the back of his head, turned backward, facing them, a face. It had been a man, once. You could see the ghost of what it had been, the structure of aristocratic features, the remnants of something that might once have been called handsome in the angular, cold-boned way that power sometimes made people look. But it had spent decades choosing to be something other than what it was born, and the choosing had left marks. The skin was like old paper over wrong angles. The eyes were red, not dramatically, not monstrously, just wrong, the particular wrongness of something that has decided human eyes were insufficient and made adjustments. The slits where a nose should have been were the worst of it, somehow. Not because they were horrifying but because they were a choice, and the choice said everything about the chooser. Quirrell's body stopped at the tree line. The face on the back of the skull was forward now, looking at Harry across the moonlit grass. Potter, it said. The voice was high and cold and thin, the voice of someone who had lost layers of themselves they hadn't known they needed. It made Harry think of music played on an instrument that had been tuned past its range, technically producing sound, but stripped of resonance. Harry stood where he was. Voldemort, he said. There was a shudder in Quirrell's body. Not the recipient of the accord compulsion shuddering, the compulsion itself, feeling the air invoke the name and receiving it like a key in a lock. You know, Voldemort said. Not a question. About the accord? Yes. Irma translated the full text in September. Harry watched the red eyes. You've been feeling it since last summer at least, I think. Maybe longer. It got worse when I claimed the seats. The face moved, not quite an expression, more like a surface being disturbed from underneath. How did you? Your blood ritual used my blood, Harry said. But you took it from the wrong person. Or the right one, depending on how you look at it. He took a step forward, not aggressive, just closing the distance to a conversational range. The Peverell Accord binds anyone who sheds the blood of the Peverell heir with intent to kill and then incorporates that blood. You did both. You killed my mother first, she was Peverell descended, though distantly, and then you used me in the resurrection. He paused. You activated it twice. The red eyes were absolutely still. Calculating, Harry recognized. Not panicking, this was not a creature that panicked easily, but recalculating, running fast through implications and exit routes. The accord can be voided, Voldemort said. It can't. I've read the full text. There's no dissolution mechanism. Harry put his hands in his pockets, because standing with your hands in your pockets when the most feared dark wizard in a century is looking at you was either confidence or lunacy, and he'd decided which one. If you kill me, the compulsion intensifies and never resolves because there's no heir to provide the acknowledgement. You'd spend whatever immortality your Horcrux is by you being pulled toward a corpse. Something crossed the red eyes. Fast and dark, and not quite what Harry had expected. Fear. Not of Harry himself, not physically, not magically. Something worse and more specific, the fear of a person who has structured their entire existence around the concept of control, who has killed and tortured and rebuilt themselves from the ground up to eliminate every vulnerability, who has made themselves into something that nothing external should be able to touch, and has just been told that the one thing that cannot be removed was embedded in their own most deliberate act. How long have you known? Voldemort asked, and the question itself was interesting. It was the question of someone assessing the situation, not reacting to it. Since July, Harry said. Gringotts did the full heritage test. Iron Maw has been researching the accord since then. And Dumbledore knew about the accord. Didn't know the full activation had occurred. I told him in October. And you waited, Voldemort said slowly, to bring it here. The red eyes moved, taking in Ron, Neville, Hermione, the moonlit grounds, the position Harry had chosen. You waited until the claim was complete. Until the seats were taken. Until the political weight of the Peverell heir was established. Yes, Harry said. The pause that followed was long enough to be its own statement. You are very like your mother, Voldemort said, and the particular flatness of it suggested this was not a pleasantry. I know, Harry said. She was brilliant. Thank you. Something shifted in the face, a spasm of what might, on a different creature, have been something like involuntary amusement. It passed immediately. What do you want, Potter? Voldemort asked. Direct. Stripped of theater. The acknowledgement, Harry said. That's what the accord requires. That's what ends the compulsion. He met the red eyes. And after that, a conversation. A real one. You want to negotiate. I want you to understand the position, Harry said. Negotiation comes after. There is nothing you could offer, 6 Horcruxes, Harry said. Quirrell's body went rigid. I know about them, Harry said, his voice the same, even, unhurried, without triumph or cruelty, just information being presented to someone who needs to have it. I know roughly what they are. I know that the diary is in the Chamber of Secrets, which we both know isn't the safe place it used to be since I'm aware of it. I know that Dumbledore has identified one and is working on the others. He paused. I also know that the only path to your permanent end requires that all of them be destroyed, and that as long as they exist, you persist, and as long as you persist, the war continues, and as long as the war continues, people die. He looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's skull without looking away. I'm not offering you victory. I'm offering you a version of this where more people survive it. The red eyes held his. You believe you could destroy the Horcruxes, Voldemort said. I believe Dumbledore can destroy most of them and I can help with the rest. Harry kept his hands in his pockets. You put one in me, didn't you? That night in Godric's Hollow. The curse rebounded and a piece of your soul fragmented into the nearest living vessel. A silence. The scar, Voldemort said. Yes. Harry touched it without thinking, the familiar lightning bolt ridged against his forehead. I've known something was different about it since Irma told me about the accord. The pressure I can feel, it's not just the accord going one direction. It's you, specifically. Because part of you is in here. He tapped his forehead. Which is also why you can't just have Quirrell kill me and be done with it. You'd be destroying a Horcrux. You cannot know that. Hermione worked it out in October, Harry said. She's been right about everything else. From behind him, Hermione said nothing. But Harry knew without looking that she was standing very straight. The red eyes moved past Harry's shoulder to look at her, briefly, with the particular attention that dangerous things give to things they've identified as sources of threat. Then back to Harry. What is the proposal? Voldemort said. The accord first, Harry said. The acknowledgement is non-negotiable, the magic will compel it eventually regardless, and doing it voluntarily gives you more control over the moment than waiting until it forces you. He let that land. Then we talk about the Horcruxes. There may be a path where they're removed without destroying you entirely, something that allows you to exist without the war. I'm not promising that. I'm saying it's worth investigating. Another pause. The alternative is the war continuing until every single Horcrux is destroyed the hard way, the accord never resolves, the compulsion eats at you for decades, and at the end of it you're gone anyway except you've taken more people with you. You are, Voldemort said, with a precision that was its own kind of compliment, making me an offer based entirely on the premise that I would prefer a form of survival to the version of this that ends with my destruction. Yes, Harry said. Am I wrong? The May night was very still. The forest breathed. The lake sat flat and silver. Above them the stars were doing what stars do, the same as they'd done when the Peverell brothers were alive, writing their accord into magic that would outlast them by 1,000 years, unbothered by the specific dramas of the people living under them. Harry waited. He wasn't afraid. He'd told Hermione that and he'd meant it, but standing here now, with the red eyes holding his and the ancient magic pulling at both of them, he understood something new about what not afraid actually meant. It didn't mean comfortable. It didn't mean unaware of stakes. It meant, the ground was solid under him, and whatever happened next, the ground would still be there, and he would deal with what was on it. Quirrell's body moved. Not toward Harry. Down. It went down slowly, not the collapse of something falling but the deliberate descent of something choosing to lower itself, and it was the most extraordinary thing Harry had ever watched, more extraordinary than the chamber in Gringotts with the light rising from water, more extraordinary than 43 votes in a Wizengamot chamber, more extraordinary than feeling ancient magic pull at the space between his ribs. Because this was the moment the accord had been built for, 1,000 years ago, by three brothers who understood something about blood and consequence and the things that outlast the people who make them. Quirrell's knees hit the grass. The face on the back of the skull was turned toward Harry. The red eyes were open and absolutely, furiously present. And Voldemort said, quietly, precisely, through clenched teeth, every word costing something considerable, I acknowledge the dominion of the Peverell heir in the matter of the blood claim. The magic moved. Harry felt it like a change in weather, the pressure that had been building since October releasing all at once, a sensation like a very long note finally resolving into its chord. The accord's pull went neutral. Not gone, it had been written into the bedrock of British magic, it would never be entirely gone, but resolved, the compulsion discharged, the clause fulfilled. Voldemort's face, from its angle on Quirrell's skull, looked like something that had been grinding its teeth for months and had just been allowed to stop. The relief was involuntary and therefore genuine. Harry noted it without cruelty. He looked at the face. I'm releasing you from the compulsion now, he said. The accord is satisfied. You can stand. I am aware of what I can do, Voldemort said. Then do it, Harry said. Because we have things to talk about and doing it from the ground is unnecessary. Quirrell's body rose. The red eyes came back to Harry's level. The Horcruxes, Voldemort said. The Horcruxes, Harry agreed. Dumbledore has found one that he believes can be destroyed without triggering any of the others. The diary in the chamber. He watched the face. There's one in me. That one's more complicated. He kept his voice even. I think Dumbledore has a theory about it. He hasn't told me yet, but he's been looking at my scar differently since October, and Dumbledore looks at things differently when he's working on a theory. He paused. If the one in me is removed, there may be a way to do it that doesn't kill me. If there is, then you lose a Horcrux, but you also lose the Accord's attachment to me. We'd be genuinely separate. You are, Voldemort said slowly, proposing that I allow the dismantling of my own immortality anchors. I'm proposing that the anchors are going to be dismantled regardless, Harry said. The question is whether it happens collaboratively, with some say over the process, or whether it happens piecemeal over the next decade in a war that continues until there's nothing left on either side worth counting. He met the red eyes. You're intelligent. You know which version of this is better for you. And if I continue the war, then I use 14 Wizengamot seats to legislate every protection we can build. I work with Dumbledore on the Horcruxes, and eventually the Accord makes your existence miserable in new ways that neither of us has fully mapped yet. Harry shrugged. I'm not threatening you. I'm describing a logical sequence. Behind Harry, Ron made a sound that was very small and very suppressed. Hermione's quill was moving. The red eyes were very still. You remind me, Voldemort said, with a quality that was almost reflective, of myself. At 11. I've been told that before, Harry said. By people who meant it as an insult. I assume you mean it differently. I mean it as an observation, Voldemort said. A boy from an inadequate situation who understood earlier than he should have that the world would not give him what he needed, and decided to take it by other means. The other means are where we diverge, Harry said. Are they? Voldemort asked, and it was a genuine question, intellectual, probing, the question of someone who had thought deeply about power and was genuinely curious where the line was for someone who just claimed 14 Wizengamot seats at age 11. Yes, Harry said. Because the things I need, and the things most people need, don't require taking them from anyone. They're not in limited supply. He held the red eyes. You spent your whole life believing that power was finite. That having it meant others didn't. That the only way to be safe was to be dominant. He paused. That's the part where we diverge. A philosophical distinction, Voldemort said. A practical one, Harry said. How's the philosophy been working for you? The last 20 years. The silence that followed was so thorough that Harry could hear the lake. Then, what is your specific proposal regarding the Horcruxes? Harry felt something that wasn't triumph, not quite, but something in the same family as relief. The recognition that the intelligence he'd been counting on was actually there. That the person, and it was a person, however far from the category they'd traveled, was still capable of calculating survival. I propose a truce, Harry said. Specific terms, written and witnessed, I'll have Vance draft it and Iron Maw will countersign, which makes it binding under blood magic and goblin charter. You cease active hostilities. Your remaining followers stand down. In return, Dumbledore and I work on the Horcrux problem with the specific goal of finding a method of removal that doesn't require your destruction, starting with the one in me. He paused. If a method exists, we use it. If it doesn't, if the only path forward requires the destruction of all the Horcruxes, then the truce holds until that point is reached and the terms at that endpoint are renegotiated. You are asking me to trust a truce that ends at the point of my maximum vulnerability, Voldemort said. I'm asking you to trust blood magic and goblin charter, which are both more reliable than human word, Harry said. The terms will specify that destruction of Horcruxes only proceeds with your knowledge and participation. No ambush. No surprise. You'll know every step. He paused. I know that's not the same as safety. But it's more than you'd have otherwise. And if I refuse? Harry looked at him. Then you go back to the castle, and we continue as before, and somewhere in the next few years, maybe sooner, maybe later, the Horcruxes get destroyed one by one, the war ends the hard way, and the last thing you're aware of is that it didn't have to go like this. He held the red eyes. Your choice. I mean that literally. The face on the back of Quirrell's skull was very still. Harry waited. He was good at waiting, 11 years of practice at the very specific patience of someone who has no power except the patience itself, and has learned to make it useful. The stars moved overhead. The forest breathed. I will consider the terms, Voldemort said finally. That's all I asked, Harry said. I want the full text of the accord, Voldemort said. The Gringotts translation. If I am to understand what binds me, I will understand it completely. I'll have Iron Maw send it. And the truce terms, Voldemort said, will include a specific clause that any Horcrux research is conducted with full transparency. Every finding shared immediately. Agreed. And the one in you is the first priority. Not the last. Harry looked at him. Understood why. Removing the Horcrux from Harry removed the most immediate leverage. If it was done first, Voldemort was less exposed, because the heir of the Accord would not be walking around with a piece of Voldemort's soul in his forehead. It was still a concession, but it was a smaller one. Agreed, Harry said. Then I will consider, Voldemort said again. I will send word through appropriate channels. His red eyes moved to the castle. This body is deteriorating. The arrangement has become insufficient. He looked back at Harry. When I return to full strength, the terms of the truce will govern that return. Not the other way. That's what the truce is for, Harry said. Yes. Quirrell's body took one step back. Then another. The tree line was close behind it. Potter, Voldemort said. Harry waited. The acknowledgement, Voldemort said. You understand what it cost. I know, Harry said. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't. Another pause. The red eyes held his for a moment that had more in it than Harry could fully name. You are going to be, Voldemort said, either the most interesting thing to happen to this world in several centuries, or its complete destruction. Or both, Harry said. Something moved across the face. The closest thing to a genuine expression Harry had seen from it, a sharp, involuntary acknowledgement that the wit had landed. Or both, Voldemort agreed. And then Quirrell walked back into the forest and was gone. Harry stood in the moonlight for a moment, not moving, just letting the night settle around the space the encounter had left. The accord pressure was genuinely gone now, the specific quality of it, the constant low-frequency hum of ancient magic unsatisfied, had resolved into something neutral, something that was just a fact rather than a demand. He turned around. Ron was staring at him. Not in a bad way, with the specific look of someone who has just witnessed something they will be telling people about for the rest of their lives and is still working out how to describe it. Neville had his wand at his side and his expression was doing several things simultaneously, relieved, exhilarated, and faintly bewildered. Hermione had 4 pages of notes and was writing a 5th, but her eyes kept coming up from the page to check him over. You're all right, she said. Fine, Harry said. He thought about it. Actually fine. Not performing fine. He's going to consider it, Ron said. What does that mean? Does he actually consider it or is that how he signals an ambush? If he wanted to ambush us he could have had Quirrell do it tonight, Harry said. He said consider because he genuinely means to consider. He's intelligent enough to calculate the odds. He looked toward the forest. Whether he calculates them the way I need him to, that I don't know. But he's thinking about it. The bow, Neville said. He was looking at the spot where Quirrell had knelt, the grass undisturbed by the impression, the ground showing no sign that anything significant had just happened on it. 1,000 years ago someone wrote that into the world and tonight it actually worked. It actually worked, Harry agreed. They walked back to the castle. The grounds were quiet and enormous around them, the lake catching moonlight, the castle windows lit in their scattered patterns. Harry walked in the middle of them, Hermione on his right still writing, Ron on his left, Neville just behind, and felt the specific warmth of being surrounded by people who came when you didn't ask them to, who stood where they stood without being told to stand there. "Dumbledore's going to want to know," Hermione said. "I'll tell him tonight," Harry said. "He was awake when I left." "He's probably been watching from his window," Ron said. "Probably," Harry agreed. "And Vance?" Hermione asked. "The truce terms?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll write her tonight." Harry thought about the terms. "The Horcrux clause first, that's the priority. If we can remove the one in me safely, it changes the landscape significantly." He touched his scar again, briefly. "Dumbledore has the theory. We just need to work out the method." "Is it frightening?" Neville asked. Quietly, directly. "The idea of, there being something of his in you?" Harry thought about it honestly. "It's strange," he said. "Not frightening. It explains things, why I can feel him sometimes, why the accord went both ways. It's like finding out a noise you've heard your whole life has a source. Unsettling, but better than not knowing." "You're very strange," Ron said, with complete affection. "Comes with the territory," Harry said. The castle doors. The entrance hall. The warmth of inside after the May night cool. They went up through the silent castle, passing a portrait that watched them with undisguised curiosity, past the corridor where a ghost drifted without acknowledgement, up the staircases and through the portrait hole and into the Gryffindor common room where the fire had burned down to orange coals. Harry stopped in the middle of the room. He stood there for a moment and looked at it, the worn armchairs, the bookshelves, the notice boards with their Quidditch schedules and sign-up sheets, the small table where they'd done most of the year's work, stacked now with books and notes and Hermione's color-tabbed research folders. The leather case was upstairs. 14 authenticated claims, all claimed. The Peverell fealty accord, satisfied. 3 Wizengamot motions passed. A truce in negotiation with the most feared dark wizard of the century. And it was still the Gryffindor common room. Still the same worn armchairs. Still Ron falling into the nearest one and pulling off his shoes with the sigh of someone who has had a very long evening. Still Hermione settling at the table to add tonight's notes to the existing files, organized with the precision of someone who has decided that if the world is going to be chaotic, her notes will not be. Still Neville sitting on the hearthrug with Trevor the Toad and the particular quiet contentment of someone who has stood in a dark field and not run and has discovered something about themselves in the process. Harry sat in his chair. He didn't read. He didn't write. He just sat and let the warmth of the fire settle on his face. "What now?" Ron asked, at the ceiling. "We sleep," Harry said. "And then tomorrow, we keep going." "That's it?" "That's it," Harry said. "There are 5 more Horcruxes, the truce terms need drafting, the Wizengamot votes need follow-up, Malfoy is still doing whatever Malfoy is doing, and Neville's grandmother wants to meet me." He paused. "Also I have Transfiguration on Friday and I haven't finished the essay." Ron made a sound that was partly a laugh and partly the exhale of someone who had expected a different kind of ending. "The Azkaban Review Board is meeting next week," Hermione said, from the table. "The motion passed but someone needs to push the follow-through. The Ministry will quietly deprioritize it if there's no pressure from the seats. I'll write Vance. She can attend as my representative. And the Death Eater Registry, Bones said she'd start the compilation personally but she'll need, I'll write Bones directly," Harry said. She voted yes on all 3. She's an ally. "Dumbledore still needs to be told about tonight," Hermione said. "I'm going now," Harry said, and stood up. Ron looked at him. "Now? It's midnight." "He's awake," Harry said. "He's been awake all night." He went back through the portrait hole and through the dark castle a second time, and the gargoyle stepped aside again, and the stairs rose, and the office was warm and lit and Dumbledore was still standing at the window. He turned when Harry came in. Harry told him everything, the conversation, the acknowledgement, the proposed truce terms, what had been agreed and what was conditional. He spoke precisely, in order, without embellishment. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which was its own form of respect. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "The Horcrux in you," Dumbledore said. "You brought it up yourself." "It was the right card to play," Harry said. "Showing him I knew put us on even footing." He paused. "You have a theory about how to remove it, don't you?" Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "I have a hypothesis," he said carefully. "It is, not simple. And it carries risk. I wanted more time before bringing it to you." "Tell me," Harry said. "Not tonight," Dumbledore said. "I will tell you everything I know within the week. I need 2 more days of research to be certain of one element." He met Harry's eyes. "That is not me managing you. That is me asking for 2 days to make sure I'm not bringing you a half-formed theory." Harry thought about it. 2 days, he said. "Then the full picture." "The full picture," Dumbledore agreed. Harry nodded and turned to go. "Harry," Dumbledore said. He stopped. "Tonight was extraordinary," Dumbledore said. The word was chosen carefully, not praise, not congratulation. Just accuracy. "I have been navigating this problem for 30 years. The Accord, the Horcruxes, the political entanglement, the war. Tonight you changed it. Substantially." Harry didn't say anything. He thought about Petunia's look. About the cupboard under the stairs. About the gap between what people said and what was true. "I had a lot of help," he said. "You accepted the help well," Dumbledore said. "That's its own skill. Rarer than most people think." Harry looked at him. The old man at the window, very late at night, in a castle full of sleeping children, carrying the weight of things he'd been carrying for a very long time and had, tonight, been able to set down a portion of. "We're going to need to be faster on the Horcruxes," Harry said. "Whatever his version of considering the truce looks like, it won't last indefinitely. He's patient, but he's been patient for a long time and patience has costs." "I know," Dumbledore said. "I will be faster." "Good," Harry said. He went back to bed. The castle settled around him on the way, the portraits watching from their frames, the staircases shifting in their gentle mechanical ways, the moonlight lying in strips across the floor through windows that had been there for 1,000 years and would be there for 1,000 more. Harry walked through it all and felt it the way you feel something that belongs to you without demanding anything from you, simply present, simply there, available to be used or simply to be in. He climbed through the portrait hole. The common room was quiet now. Hermione had gone up, her notes stacked precisely on the table. Ron's snoring came faintly from the stairs. Neville had left a blanket folded on the hearthrug where he'd been sitting. Harry stood at the window for a moment. Outside, the grounds were still. The Forbidden Forest was a dark line at the edge of everything. Somewhere out there, Quirrell was, Voldemort was, considering. Harry looked at the stars. The same stars the Peverell brothers had looked at. The same stars that had been there when someone wrote an oath into the fabric of magic and trusted it to hold. It had held. He went to bed. He was asleep before he'd finished the thought that was trying to form, something about what the next year would look like, what the truce terms would say, what Dumbledore's 2 more days would reveal, and his dreams were quiet, which was its own kind of answer. In the morning there would be letters to write, Hermione's follow-up questions to answer, Transfiguration to attend, and a world that was not fixed but was different than it had been yesterday, bent slightly towards something better by the specific pressure of a decision made in a moonlit field by a boy in properly fitting robes who had decided, early and clearly, that the gap between what people said he was and what he actually was might as well be useful. It was. It would continue to be. The stars turned overhead, patient and exact, writing nothing and remembering everything.